You have never truly been weak. You have only been fractured. Something inside you has always known that the world you were handed was incomplete, that the person you were taught to be was carved from the shell of something much larger. You did not break, you were never allowed to form. Beneath the polished mask of obedience and adaptation is a soul that was interrupted before it could remember its own name, not forgotten, interrupted. There is a difference, and that difference is where the pain lives. From the very beginning, you were trained to divide yourself, smile when you felt sorrow, to agree when your instincts screamed no, to be praised for silence, punished for curiosity, and rewarded for shrinking in just the right way. And over time, a kind of forgetting began. Not the forgetting of facts or faces, but the deeper kind, the forgetting of your original shape. Your strength did not vanish. It was scattered, buried in the corners of your being, labeled dangerous, inappropriate, or selfish. But every fragment still remembers. You call it anxiety, exhaustion, depression, but those are only symptoms of the deeper betrayal, the war between who you are and who you were permitted to be. Your nervous system is not malfunctioning, protesting. Broaching your confusion is not a flaw, it's the residue of contradiction. How do you feel whole when wholeness was never modeled, never named, never safe to reach for? You have been split across lines you never drew, forced to choose between being accepted and being alive. We live in a world that teaches children to amputate parts of themselves just to be loved. And that wound does not vanish, it matures. It becomes your personality, your habits, your coping. The roles you play so well, they become indistinguishable from identity. And then, one day, you wake up inside a life that looks nothing like your soul. You smile with your face while your spirit screams through your bones. And you call that being functional. There is a moment, quiet but piercing, when something inside you begins to remember. Not in language, not in logic, a sense that there was supposed to be more. A vague and wordless knowing that somewhere beneath the noise, you are still whole, still waiting, still burning. This is not sentiment, it's evidence. The mind can be fooled, the emotions misled, but the body does not lie. And your body remembers what the world asked you to forget. You were never weak, you were never broken, but your strength was placed in a cage and renamed danger. Your intuition was silenced and renamed rebellion. Your anger was pathologized. Your boundaries were called disrespect. And so you learned to turn your power against yourself, to monitor your authenticity for signs of threat, to suppress the very flame that could have guided you home. And yet, the flame never went out. This is the tension that haunts you, the sense that something is wrong, but you can't name it, That something is missing, but you've never seen it. That you are here, but not fully here. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the disowned parts of the self, repressed, not because they are evil, but because they were inconvenient. But the shadow is not your enemy. It is your exiled potential, your silenced strength, your unlived life. So when you feel fear, rage, sorrow, when you feel numbness or detachment, those are not signs that you are failing. They are signs that something ancient inside you is still alive, still waiting to be claimed, still fighting, not to destroy you, but to return you to yourself. And that fight is not weakness, it is the first breath of wholeness. The fracture begins long before you can speak, not through violence or neglect, but through something far more invisible. Conditioning is a subtle, persistent shaping of your inner world by those who were themselves shaped. You were born with wildness, with raw sensation, with instinctual clarity. But clarity is inconvenient in a world that prefers control. So society does not break you outright, it guides you to break yourself, bit by bit, thought by thought, reward by reward. Carl Jung saw this process clearly. He knew that identity was not a discovery, was a negotiation between what the soul longs to express and what the world allows. Pretend, the ego, in its attempt to survive, becomes a mask. The persona, It smiles where it aches, nods where it doubts, conforms to avoid exile, but to every act of self-betrayal leaves a trace. And those traces do not vanish, they sink into the unconscious, forming the very structure of your suffering. Jung did not view the unconscious as a dumping ground of unwanted thoughts. He saw it as sacred, a forgotten temple of the self, the place where the rejected parts of you still wait to be integrated. He called it individuation, the process of becoming whole, not perfect, not enlightened, whole, to reclaim the parts you've hidden, denied, shamed, or suppressed, not just the beautiful, but the terrifying, the power, the rage, the ecstasy, the freedom. But the modern world does not want you whole. Wholeness is unpredictable. It cannot be marketed, managed, or medicated. So instead, it gives you roles, labels, paths of least resistance. You are taught to be useful, agreeable, efficient, ever true. Hey, and the result is a life built on inner compromise. You chase meaning through status, relief through consumption, peace through perfection, but none of it lasts. It's because wholeness cannot be outsourced. Philosophers like Nietzsche warned us of this trap. He saw that morality, as defined by the herd, often masked a deeper fear of the self, fear of instinct, fear of freedom. He wrote, not to rebel for rebellion's sake, but to awaken a dormant will to power, not over others, but over the false structures within, to reclaim the chaos as sacred, to see the madness as misunderstood clarity. The man who cannot howl, he said, cannot find his truth. And yet you were taught to fear your own howl, to suppress the fire in your gut, to doubt the visions that visit you in the quiet. Every culture, in some form, tells you who you must be before you ever ask who you are. But the soul does not forget its shape. It only waits, beneath the trauma, beneath the personas, beneath the fear of being seen too clearly. There is something untouched, not innocent, not pure, but real. Hate and realness is the one thing that can't be faked. What we call growth is often a return, a remembering, not of ideas, but of embodiment. The self is not something to create, it is something to uncover. It has been buried beneath compliance, discipline, politeness, self-denial, and now it pulses like a drum beneath the noise, calling you inward, not for escape, not for comfort, but for contact with the truth that never left. When the soul is split, life becomes performance. You walk through your days wearing a face stitched together from approval, strategy, and survival. You measure your worth by external metrics: productivity, appearance, validation, ever realizing that what you seek is not admiration, but reunification. The ache you feel is not weakness, it is misalignment. The inner tension between who you are and who you've been forced to become. This fracture distorts perception. You begin to view life not as something to inhabit, but as something to conquer, control, or endure. You're trained to suppress sensation in favor of function, to override emotion in favor of efficiency. You become fluent in self-abandonment, and soon your body becomes a stranger. Your instincts become noise, and your emotions become threats. You're no longer living, you're maintaining, managing a version of yourself that others can accept. It shows up in quiet, insidious ways. You second-guess your intuition. You sabotage your own progress. You become addicted to comparison because you've lost your internal compass. You feel exhausted, not from doing too much, but from being too little of yourself. Every day becomes a negotiation with invisibility. How much of yourself must you dim to avoid disruption? How many dreams must you downplay just to survive your own doubt? And the world, ironically, will reward you for this. It's for being pleasing, for being productive, for being predictable. But that reward is a leash, because deep down, something in you knows this safety is a trap. You are not made to fit in. You are made to awaken. The longer you pretend otherwise, the more your body rebels through anxiety, depression, numbness, rage. These are not malfunctions, they are messages. Symptoms of a truth denied. Trauma, too, plays a role here, not just the dramatic moments, but the subtle betrayals. The times you had to shrink to be loved. The moments you silenced your voice to avoid being left behind. These wounds do not simply fade. They shape your worldview. They teach you to expect rejection where you seek love, abandonment where you long for depth. They teach you to armor up to protect, but in doing so, to also imprison. And so you live in fragmentation. It's trying to build a life on top of disconnection. But no matter how much you achieve, how many books you read, how many habits you mastered, the foundation is false. The structure will always feel unstable. This is the tragedy of modern self-improvement. It polishes the mask, it optimizes the persona. But it rarely asks the one question that matters. What if the person you're trying to improve is not the real you? To be clear, this is not your fault. You were conditioned to abandon yourself long before you had the tools to resist. You were trained to survive, not to self-realize. But now, the responsibility is yours, 'cause no one can give you back what was taken, only you can reclaim it. And that reclamation does not begin with doing more. It begins with seeing clearly, feeling honestly, listening deeply. The revolution is internal. Reclamation begins in stillness, not in effort, not in ambition, but in the quiet defiance of no longer running. You stop chasing who you think you should be, and you sit here uncertain, guarded, facing the aching presence of who you truly are beneath the layers. And in that silence, something old awakens. Not a new identity, but a forgotten one. A self not shaped by fear, but forged in freedom. This is where healing becomes transformation. You stop negotiating with the past and begin transmuting it. Not by denying what happened, but by extracting meaning from it. Jung called this the process of individuation, the lifelong unfolding. The true self through confrontation with the unconscious. Not through perfection, not through virtue, but through wholeness. The integration of light and shadow, rage and tenderness, strength and vulnerability. You were taught to fix your flaws, but now you begin to understand. The flaw is the frame itself. You don't need to be fixed, you need to be found. The parts you've hidden, suppressed, or shamed are not liabilities. They are locked chambers of power. Anger becomes clarity. Grief becomes depth. Shame becomes the doorway to authentic self-compassion. You no longer amputate pieces of yourself to appear lovable. You gather them back, and you begin to see that your pain was never the enemy. It was a compass. Every heartbreak pointed to where you longed to connect. Every breakdown was a crack in the mask, a rupture in the lie. When you stop pathologizing your suffering, you realize it was the most honest part of you all along. The suffering wasn't a sign of your weakness, it was a rebellion of your wholeness. From this shift, discipline becomes sacred. Not the discipline of rigidity, but of devotion. You no longer pursue habits out of punishment. You cultivate practices out of reverence. Meditation becomes communion, not escape. Movement becomes expression, not control. Boundaries become self-respect, not rejection. The effort you once wasted on performance is now redirected into presence, aliveness, integrity, and you start to speak differently. Not louder, but truer. You no longer explain your value, embody it. You no longer beg to be seen, you see yourself. Meet the world, not with a script, but with the spine. The approval of others no longer defines you, because you have become intimate with the sound of your own inner voice, not the voice of fear. The voice beneath it, the one that has waited years for you to return. This is not a destination. This is a becoming. A return to essence through the fire of awareness. You stop outsourcing your sense of self to culture, to trends, to algorithms. You unplug from the noise and reorient to the sacred, to the body, to the breath, to the soil of your own psyche. And in doing so, you reclaimed the authority that was always yours. The authority to define reality from the inside out. The truth is simple, but it's not soft. It does not coddle you with comfort. It carves you open. It demands that you die to the image of who you thought you needed to be. Because the version of you that everyone could love was never real. It was a survival mask, a beautifully crafted deception. But behind it, beneath the performance and the pain, was always something stronger than acceptance. Wholeness. You were never weak. You were split, divided against yourself by a world that rewarded performance and punished truth. A world that labeled your sensitivity as fragility, your rage as danger, your doubt as failure. But the real fracture wasn't in your spirit, it was in the story you were told about what it meant to be good, worthy, safe, lovable. And you believed it. Of course you did. It was the only story you knew. But now you remember. You remember the voice that never left. The one that whispered in the silence, that surged beneath the pain, that pulsed in your dreams when the world grew too loud. That voice is not broken. That voice is not small. That voice is you. Not the you who was trained to please. Not the you who was taught to shrink. The original you. The wild you. The whole you. Carl Jung called it the self, the totality of who you are. Conscious and unconscious. Light and shadow. Not the ego, not the mask, not the persona you wear in public, okay? But the center of your psyche, the axis of your being, okay? And once you touch it, even for a moment, you no longer live for the surface. You descend, you deepen, you become dangerous to illusion and magnetic to truth. That is your real power. It's not the power to control others, but the power to no longer betray yourself. It's not the power to dominate, but to integrate. It's look into your own darkness and not flinch. To hold your contradictions without shame. To love without losing yourself. To grieve without collapsing. To rise without needing to be admired. That is what it means to be whole. You will not be celebrated for this. You will not always be understood, but you will feel it in your breath, in your bones, in your choices. You will walk differently, speak differently. You will stop apologizing for existing, okay? And you will start living as if you are already enough, because you are. You always were. The wound was never in your worth. It was in your permission to know it. So this is not a call to action. It is a call to awareness. Sit with the truth. Let it undo you. Let it wash away the layers that were never yours. God's. Let it strip you bare, not to leave you empty, but to reveal what was buried beneath the noise. The unshakable, undeniable reality that you are not here to be accepted. You are here to remember that you already belong. You are not weak. You were never allowed to be whole. Now you are.